I'm going to start with the observation that we live in a mucky world. I mean, physically. Carpets, cupboards, the environment. You can imagine what the world, the urban world was like before the vacuum cleaner came along. Imagine taking your carpets out and having to thrash them on a clothesline to get the muck out, and knowing that within a week they would be just as dirty as they were before. We live in a world full of particles, bits of dead skin floating around, all sorts of things floating in the air that make life dirty and uncomfortable. A lot of these things we can ignore. Environmentally speaking, yes, we live in a world that's full of particles and bits that can be toxic to us, a world of pathogens. Now, the environment is a question that has been taken up in force and with great enthusiasm as a secular movement. Although Adam was told to take care of the earth, to be a steward of it, generally speaking, the religious people, that is the Christians in the modern world, have been lacking in this particular endeavor because it has been the secularists who have taken it over. I suppose that we've all been influenced by Sir David Attenborough and his campaign on the Blue Planet and so on. This has brought our attention to plastics in the ocean and various forms of pollution around. Well, David Attenborough was asked whether he was an atheist, and to my surprise, he said, no, he was not. I found this an encouraging thought because he does believe in evolution. He is a scientist, and yet he has left the door open for a belief in God. As far as the world is concerned, the pathogens, the diseases, the germs, and the various things that we confront in our everyday life, it has been recognized that the human family is in a toxic environment and that we are at risk from things invading our bodies. Louis Pasteur was on the forefront of this clinical endeavor to make it possible for us to be protected from various germs. His principal interest was in hydrophobia. I suppose Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a German-Austrian, was one of the leaders in identifying germs. In fact, in the hospitals that he went to, the doctors and the nurses laughed at him when he said there were invisible creatures, germs, that were invading the women who were giving birth and causing early child death. Sir Joseph Lister, who invented antiseptic and who practiced in such a way that it enabled people to live more healthily and have longer lives. Edward Jenner, known as the father of the vaccine because he concentrated particularly on smallpox. And this is where my title of inoculation comes from. Inoculation used to be called variolation, V-A-R-I-O-L-A-T-I-O-N, because it had connections with the smallpox. Smallpox had been devastating the human family for centuries. There were early attempts at vaccination or inoculation in China and Asia, but it was Edward Jenner and his study of the cow maids who milked the cows in Britain, this was in the 18th century, who he found were immune to smallpox. And he reasoned from this that they were getting a sample of the pox from the cows that they were milking. They developed blisters on their hands. And he had the insight to take scabs from their hands and to take the elements of the scab, scrapings from the scab, and inject them into his patient, who happened to be a young boy at the time. The young boy got a fever, but he did not get the smallpox. For this reason, Edward Jenner has been credited with the man who has saved more lives in human history, and is well celebrated because of this invention of the smallpox, which has led the smallpox vaccine, which has led in turn to other innovations and the study of inoculation and what we would call today vaccine. I'm going to read now from Deuteronomy 8, 6-9. I'm reading from the NIV, Deuteronomy 8, 6-9. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in obedience to him and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with brooks, streams, and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. This is an interesting point because we don't often think of the Jewish nation of early Israel engaging in any industrial endeavor such as mining. That's how you get copper out of the hills. And the Lord also mentions iron. Now, copper, this is a very interesting product. It is in almost all of the electronic devices that we use, our telephones, our computers. In Johannesburg, South Africa, there's been a great problem with the railways. Thieves have been stealing the cables from the gantries, from wherever they can get it, and stations have been shut down. Much of the railway network in Johannesburg has been devastated from thieves who are stealing the copper from the wires. This has been had a serious impact on commuters going to work, simply traveling from one place to another. They have had to take buses, had to walk, but they cannot, in some cases, use the trains. Job 28, 1-4. Job 28, 1-4. There is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from ore. Now, for the Jews, the copper was invaluable, principally because of its application in the tabernacle. We know that the laver was made from copper. The laver was finished with polished copper over wood, and copper appeared in the pedestals of the posts. Now, copper represents, as you know, perfect human nature. So as far as the Israelites were concerned, the chief use for copper for them was for the religious services in connection with the tabernacle. But here in Job 28, we read about mining for silver, a place where gold is refined, iron is taken from the earth, and copper being smelted from ore. Mortals put an end to the darkness. That is, they have torches, lamps, blazing lamps where they can see where to dig. They search out the farthest recesses for ore in the blackest darkness. Far from human dwellings, they cut a shaft. In places untouched by human feet, far from other people, they dangle and sway. dangling and swaying, I have an image in my mind of the description by the Canadian historian Pierre Burton in his book, The Last Spike. The book concerns the development of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Now, which was built remarkably from between 1881, 1885. Now, considering that Canada had only had Confederation as recently as 1867, this was a remarkable achievement. And this line ran from Montreal to a place called Craigellachie, I think that's the way you pronounce it, which was in BC, which was not then under Confederation. Now, this line covering this distance was quite a remarkable achievement. Interestingly enough, that line took the long way round. It had originally intended to take a shorter route. This was under the premiership of John A. Macdonald. But for a young country to build a rail this length in such a short time was quite incredible. And the Chinese, who were part of the labor force, along with the Irish, but particularly the Chinese, were given the most dangerous task of shinning up the cliffside, drilling holes in the mountain, jamming it with dynamite, and then shinning down as fast as they could before they got blown up. This was their job. And they were very good at what they did. The Canadian Pacific Railway, in taking the long route, actually enabled Canada to stitch its country together. It also, by taking the more southerly route, allowed itself to be protected from the incursion from the United States to the south. At that time, the United States was pushing forward up into open territory, what is now Oregon Territory, British Columbia, and so on. And being as an active nation as they were, the Canadians realized that if they did not get the line stitched up across their country like a zipper from one side to the other, that they would lose the territory. So you can be thankful, Canadians, that you have a whole country with a definable border and that you are separated from the United States. George Vancouver was the great explorer who passed across the nation from what would become the United States and Canada. And that's why there are two Vancouvers, one in the United States and one in British Columbia. Now, this epic development of the Canadian Pacific Railway is celebrated by Gordon Lightfoot in his rather remarkable trilogy, in which he runs about 7 minutes, I think. You can find it on YouTube, in which he celebrates the building of the railway and what it meant to the Canadian, to Canada itself. It's very useful to Canada, particularly during the Riel Rebellion, and it enabled Canada to quelch the rebellion, which might otherwise have divided the country. All right, I'm going to move on now to Numbers 21, 6 to 8. Numbers 21, 4 to 8. Numbers 21, 4 to 8. All right. Numbers 21, 4 to 8. The heading in my Bible, it says the bronze snake. But it wasn't bronze, it was copper. They, that is Israel, traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go round Edom. But the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze copper snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the copper snake, they lived. And this is a very interesting development. Now let's go to 2 Kings 18, 1-4. 2 Kings 18, 1-4. Now we come into the reign of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good king, but he was dealing with a fractious nation, a nation that did not want to obey God. His father, I believe it was Asa, was not a good king, and he encouraged the people to idolatry. One scholar has said that when Israel took ideas from foreign nations, they began to behave like foreign nations. And at the time, this was idolatry. It included burning their children in the fires of Moloch. And it was a sad time for Judah. Hezekiah tried to set some of this right. Verses 1-4, chapter 18. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. These were forms of idol worship. He broke into pieces, this is the important part, he broke into pieces the brass snake that Moses had made, for up to that time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan. So here you have a device that Moses had caused to be erected, the copper snake, as an antidote to the snakes with which the Israelites, the Judahites, had been bitten. And here was Hezekiah destroying it, because it had become itself an object of worship. I suppose we can draw an analogy from this, that it is possible that even as religious people, we may sometimes worship the wrong things, or we may love the right things and become so obsessed with them that it amounts to a form of worship. And so he broke into pieces the snake that Moses had made, and up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. He broke it up, and he said, more or less using the word Nehushtan, that this is just a bit of copper. So that was the fate that this snake met, but it had to be done. And because the Israelites, in their history, had led them astray, and Hezekiah was getting ready for the Reformation. He went on, of course, with Hezekiah's great Passover, bringing the people to repentance, many sacrifices made, the temple was purified, and Hezekiah, of course, he himself had a troubled history. He eventually finished up giving secrets of the temple to his enemies, for which God denounced him. Hezekiah was the one, you remember, who prayed to be delivered from a serious illness, and God gave him another 15 years. the sign being that the sundial would be turned back 15 degrees. The pole that the snake was raised on represented Jesus on the cross. Jesus was the antidote to the sin with which the Jews and ourselves are afflicted. My wife called to my attention the fact that in Australia, the scientists have been experimenting and succeeded with extracting elements of sheep's blood from which they have created an antivenom against snakes. Now, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to read something into this. If one is inclined to, at least we might apply symbology to it, that the sheep represents Christ. His blood is the blood that works in our souls, our beings, as an antivenom for the snake that has bit all of us. This is an interesting analogy. We have a cat at home, and this cat is very picky about her food. The food that she ate yesterday, she doesn't like today. The food that she eats today, she won't like tomorrow. And we'll put it out for her, whatever it happens to be, because we sort of have to guess. We do a lot of guessing as to what she might like. It's incredible, isn't it, that grown-up people have to condescend to a little creature that stands 10 inches high, is furry and got 4 legs. And so then we watch her and we see what she'll do with it. Well, she'll sniff around it, then she'll turn up her nose and she'll walk off. And then we'll let it sit there for the morning, all day if necessary, but she won't touch it. She won't touch it at all. She would rather die than eat it. She would rather throw herself off a cliff than eat it. Now, you know, some people are like that. And perhaps sometimes we're a bit like that. If what we get doesn't quite suit our taste, our spiritual taste, our mood at the time, and perhaps because we are particular about the food that we eat, I'm talking about the spiritual food, yes, we do like to be careful. But we are all inoculated with sin. I say we're inoculated with sin and not from it. So we experience sin firsthand. We observe other people. And because we are inoculated with sin, we are not able to be freed from it, because what has happened to us is we have been given the offscourings of the scabs of the disease of sin from previous generations. And there is nothing in us, in our nature, in the nature of the human family, that can heal us of the disease that we have. So I'm turning this the other way around. When an inoculation was a bad inoculation, the patient died. What we have is an inoculation of sin from our distant forebear from Adam. Now, this is not a popular belief. Those who absolutely refuse to take the cure, to eat the food that they're given, to behave like our cat, who simply will not give in. There are many such people who could, if they would, accept a deliverance. The world is a very clever place. I do not personally object to atheists. I think atheists give advantages to society. That is, they look for ideas and arguments and possibilities that would never occur to us. This is a very interesting thing because they're human beings as we are, but they feel that they can manage without. And so they resist the obvious implications. It's like traveling into space. We talked about the James Webb Telescope, a most remarkable device which is parked 1 million miles out into space. Now, who could have imagined that this was possible? A telescope that can see many, many hundreds of light years into the past. The object, of course, is to determine where life started and when the universe came about. Now, this is an interesting question. Now, I couldn't do this investigation. Probably you couldn't do it either. It takes a particular mind and a particular interest, but perhaps we wouldn't be quite so interested in doing it if we're content with what we have. So somebody has to do it. Some things have to be done. It may not be us that do it because we don't have the ability, but things will get done because this is how the Lord has ordered the world. So the Canadian Space Agency, the NASA, the Japanese Space Agency, the European Space Agency, they're all active and involved, and the Russians involved in exploring the origins of the universe. That thing which 14,000 million years ago was to have been compressed in an almost invisible dot and exploded and given us what we are. Well, whether this happened or not, the fact that one is searching for this is not in itself a bad thing. The problem is that it leads to the conclusion, were they to find it, that there was a single beginning to the universe. And this doesn't put them any closer than we have got, because we say, yes, there is a single origin. But those who refuse to accept this will do anything to avoid the obvious conclusion. That is that there is a God, and a God who created the things that we see. The doctrine of theodicy, which is the belief that there is evil in the world and that God is responsible for it, is not as far-fetched as one might think. That is, from the standpoint of permission of evil, it looks very much like an affirmation of evil. That is, evil which God has sanctioned. Now, you can understand why people become atheists simply because they see evil in the world and they have compassion as we would have compassion. And we should count ourselves very blessed that we don't have to worry about those particular things because of the doctrines that have been given to us. The Nehushtan that Hezekiah destroyed, saying that this is just a bit of copper, is being worshipped by those who don't understand the salvation that Christ has given. So his image in that pole, that copper pole, that copper snake, has been ignored and distorted. Now, for us as Christians, we have our own particular problems and we have our own particular sins. We are not immune from the faults of the flesh. And so we hew very closely to the Lord and cling close to him, because this is the only way that we can get an understanding of our consecration. We do our observations because we see sin firsthand. We see it in our brethren. We see it in ourselves. Gallons of sins flow out from ourselves. We sometimes are drowning in sin, and were we not to have the satisfaction, the justification by faith that has come to us because we have accepted Christ on the cross, we would become very discouraged. And our lives would be filled up with muck and dust and dirt that we would be unable to shake off. So we hide things behind our cupboards, the cupboards of our lives. When I do work around our house, I have to knock down a wall, a cupboard, and have to rebuild, let's say, a new partition, to put up a new wall. I always try to put something into the wall that expresses who we are as a family, our names, the members of the family, the date at which the thing was inserted, and something to the effect that we are waiting for the kingdom of God and Christ on earth. I've been doing this now for well over 20, 30 years, and those walls have not yet been opened up. No one else has come into our house and knocked them down and looked at those declarations. It made me think about the fact that in Revelation, the saints cried, "How long, O Lord? How long? How long do we need to wait?" Well, no one has an answer to that question. And it's been touched on a number of times in this convention that we have been waiting a long time. We may have to wait longer than I am capable of living. Sometimes I go to Wikipedia, and there's one is Wikipedia is the encyclopedia that answers a question before you've even thought of asking it. It's quite remarkable, because you'll find that almost anything you can think of, when you go there, there is an answer to that question. I don't know how they do it. But anyway, as one does, you look at subjects, things that you might be interested in. And sometimes I look at people, celebrities. And I look to see, so-and-so, so-and-so, well, was an actor. So-and-so is a musician. Well, I like the ises. I'm not keen on the wases. So if the person is an is, I think let's see. He was born in 1931, and he's an is. So that's rather good. I think I vote for him. I want to hang on as long as I can. I want to be an is. I may not get into Wikipedia, but I don't want to be under the was column. Now you look at the was, and this fella died. He was 77. Maybe he was 72. He's younger than I am, and is already a was. So being in the is column is probably what we all would like to be. I don't think any of us are in a hurry to get it over and done with, because we love life, and there are many good things to love about life, particularly because we can continue learning. And to be learning is one of the great blessings that we have as Christians, because the longer we live, the longer we have to develop our characters, the longer we are able to fight against our sins, the more grace we can receive from the Lord. And if we can live a good, long life, then I would be happy with that. We don't want to see brethren go. And sometimes when they must, it is a sadness. Let's rejoice in the blessings that we have. And remember that there is no condition in which we can find ourselves that the Lord is not able to forgive us for sin and to continue working with us, because we have been justified by faith. We have been cleansed by Christ on the cross. And that is the image that we should fix in our minds always, that we are justified by faith, we are cleansed by belief in him, and we therefore can rejoice and be happy in what we have and what the Lord has given to us. God bless all of you. God bless us.